I heard this thing on the news that campervans were going to be cheap this year because of the lack of international tourists in New Zealand.
Tourism Holdings Limited are announcing incredibly low deals to hire their campervans over school holidays and long weekends from just, get this, $29 per day.
Omi and I didn't waste any time. We got in and booked a 6-berth campervan for the whole winter school holidays. This is me on a windy day, and this is my family. I hope you like my driving slippers. We decided to see our own backyard in a campervan with 3 young children in the middle of winter. Sometimes the weather wasn't that great, but the sights were still good. Most of the time the weather was amazing and the sights were still good. We were one of those tourists in a van driving slowly on a highway, but for once the campervan was full of kiwis seeing their own country. Our journey of nearly 2,500 kilometres was going to be a circuit of the lower half of the South Island. So day 1 was really a mission to get on the road and get cracking. We booked a powered site ahead of time so that we had the security of having somewhere to camp on our first night and get a few things in the camper sorted. The kids set us up at the crack of dawn on a very chilly Oamaru morning. It was great because it meant we were the first people on the streets of the whole town. We got down to the old part of town before the crowds arrived. Cool old buildings, fun for the kids, and a freaky steampunk attraction. After a big first day, we took it much easier, checking out the Moeraki boulders before settling into a freedom camp at Warrington, just north of Dunedin. Day 3 was a biggie. I wanted to show off my swanky work HQ in Dunedin, but we also wanted to see the Catlins. This was one of our worst weather days, but we were well kitted out. We banged on raincoats and walked out to Nugget Point. It was pretty rugged, but that's what lighthouses should be.
The seaweed looks little.
After some interaction with the locals, we explored the beautiful Purakanui Falls. The rain made the walk a bit soggy, but made the waterfall amazing. With rain pouring and the wind pounding, we settled in at Curio Bay, getting there right at dusk. The weather was barely any better the next day, a bit drier and a bit colder too. First we checked out the petrified forest, logs that turned into stone. We had another big day ahead of us, needing to get to Manapouri via Invercargill. Amazingly, of the 3 hours we spent in Invercargill, at Macca's and the supermarket, none of it made it onto the camera. The drive to Manapouri was wet. With Lockie sleeping and the big kids with their headphones on, it didn't really matter. The countryside still looked beautiful, and when we made it to Manapouri, it was love at first sight. We got it on a good weather day, but the way that the bush comes right the way down to the lake, and the massive mountains in the background, snow-capped, it's just remarkable. The campground was idyllic, right on the waterfront, surrounded by bush with walks all around. Getting the kids to stretch their legs definitely staved off a lot of feral behaviour. To be fair, it wasn't hard to get them walking on these tracks. We woke up to a flatty, so after pumping up the tyre, we made our way to Te Anau, looking to get all the way to Milford Sound that day. I took another look at the tyre when we got to Te Anau, and it was flat again, so we had to get that fixed before we continued. The road to Milford Sound was just unbelievable. From the road, mountains just rise up into the sky. They're bush clad and snow capped on top. The kids were amazed as well. One of the cool things about travelling with a camper van is you can stop for a cuppa and then look out the window. The tunnel would have been a feat of engineering if it was done today. To think it was bored out in the 1930s beggars belief. I have a small family connection to this tunnel. My great uncle, John Christie, was the chief surveyor of the tunnel. It seems he did his job right, because after going in one end, we came out the other. Another beautiful campsite hosted us that night, the Milford Lodge. Day 5 was the reason we covered so much ground so quickly. We had booked in a boat trip on the Milford Sound. Even though it's actually a fjord, it's still called Milford Sound. I think we should just call it Milfjord and be done with it. After the boat trip, we grabbed a pie, and then we hightailed it out of there. We found a cute little dock camping site, Henry Creek, on the shores of Lake Tiano. After 3 nights in a row of unbelievably beautiful campsites, we were starting to get an appreciation of why so many international tourists do our country by camper. Our goal for day 6 was to get to Queenstown to stay with Omi's auntie and uncle. By the end of the day, Omi was feeling a bit crook with a sore throat, so I spent about 45 minutes with the kids at a playground in Jack's Point, while Omi snoozed in the camper. And this is one of the great things about the camper. If you're just feeling a bit rough, you can jump in the back, have a snooze, wake up 45 minutes later and feel 100% better. It's always a pleasure visiting Angie and Wok. They've become like a third set of grandparents to our kids. The kids are so comfortable there and they just love catching up with those two. Their place has amazing views of Lake Wakatipu. And good access if you want to swim. Since there were no international tourists in town, we wanted to see what Queenstown's town centre looked like. It was unbelievable. We couldn't get a park, so we moved on to Arrowtown, which was exactly the same. Eventually, we ended up at Millbrook. It was encouraging to see Kiwis spending up large in the tourist spots that have been so devastated by COVID-19. But it was also a reminder to how commercialised Queenstown had become. After 2 nights of real beds, it was time to say goodbye to Angie and Wok. We were off to Wanaka. Omi and I have a guilty pleasure country calendar. Each Sunday night we dutifully sit down and watch the latest episode. Recently we watched the Wanaka Lavender farm featured on it, so that's where we went first. It's a fantastic family destination. What do you reckon, Lockie? Hey, Lockie. Yeah. Hello. 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 The kids just had a blast mucking around, and they had a lovely little cafe area as well. So I grabbed a cup of tea before we headed off to our camp. We got to our campground at Curio Bay quite early that day. It was nice to have a bit of chill out time and let the kids explore the campsite a bit. By this stage we'd also bumped into a few other fellow campers a few times. Shout out to Janet, who we saw here after bumping into her and her family about 4 times. This campsite scored pretty well on the sunset index, pretty good on the sunrise index as well. The kids just love getting around the lake. Well, not just the kids. After a few days of not travelling too far, we had another biggie ahead of us. We were going through the Haast Pass. We weren't too sure where we'd end up, but we hit the road early to keep our options open. Just another day with just amazing scenery. These are the Fantail Falls. You can see why people bother to stop to have a look. They're pretty amazing. And another mean spot to practice my skimming. We managed to make it all the way to Lake Pāringa to the dock campsite there. The sunset really turned it on that night. The morning wasn't too bad either. The Glaciers were next on our list. We made it to Fox early. We didn't really consider walking up to it, it's just too inaccessible for our kids at their age. We settled instead for a walk around the stunning Lake Matheson and views from afar that were still incredibly spectacular. We managed to get a little closer to Franz Josef Glacier, but it was just a shadow of what it was like when I first visited around 25 years ago. That night we found Rainforest Retreat. Not only is it a beautiful rainforest secluded campground, but also a spa and restaurant too. The kids were free, so we made the most of that. Setting off the next day, we searched for the natural hot pools near Hurry Hurry. The washed out track put an end to that.
What do I do if Dad tags me, Mum?
Tag Cohen.
Tag. Mummy says, do it.
With Lockie strategically falling asleep at the right time, we managed to boost it all the way up to Punakaiki and found a little freedom camping spot to spend the night. In the morning, we hit up the walks. First the Pororari River Walk, and then the Pancake Rocks. Throw your washing in there, eh? It's like a big giant washing machine, isn't it? Yeah.
Somewhere where you won't be able to go.
Yeah. We were mindful of some of the big travel days we had before, so we kept it short and aimed for Ivy Bay at Lake Brunner, with a nice walk at Moana along the way. I know I go on about campsites that we stayed at, but Ivy Bay was yet another, and it was free. I've just been blown away on this trip by the incredible locations of campsites, both paid and free. The light at sunset and dusk was sublime. On day 14, the aim was to camp somewhere in our home province of Canterbury. The Otira Gorge and Arthur's Pass were obstacles to overcome to get there. The camper battled up the steep Otira Gorge. When we crossed the divide, it got cold quickly. At Arthur's Pass, we did the Devil's Punch Bowl. It was a bit of a slog to get up there, about 30 minutes with the kids, but Elsie was an absolute champion and slogged it up there while Cohen practically ran. It was so cold up there that all the spray from the waterfall had frozen on the rocks around it. We could feel home getting closer now. We stayed our last night at Warrington Domain, just out of Springfield. It's a cute little camping ground, but I guess most importantly of all, it has a playground for the kids. On our last day, we were on the road early, keen to get back, unpacked and cleaned up so we could return to our camper on time. It was an incredible journey. When we booked 2 weeks in a tin can with 3 kids in the middle of winter, we had some doubts. We thought if worst came to worst, we could always give up and come straight home. Incredibly though, after 2 weeks, we felt like we could easily do another 2. We're so privileged to live in this country, and I'm glad we've had a chance to explore it a little. I think we might have to explore it a little bit more.
Oh,